everybody. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm extremely excited about this event that we are hosting. The AEC and SJSU's Career Center has partnered to bring this event to our audience in order to provide some wonderful, insightful information. Before we actually get started, I do want to let our attendees know that this event is going to be recorded. So for those of you who would like to review the information being presented here today or share it with those who unfortunately are not able to be here, you will have the opportunity to do so. I do want to encourage our audience members to fill out our Google attendance form. This attendance form will be used to provide a Zoom recording copy to all of our attendees. The Google attendance form can be found in the chat box, and my colleague Sandra will be putting that Google attendance form in the chat box for you in a second. We will also be posting this recording in each of our department's respective websites, which I will be sharing this information later in our event. Also wanted to share with everyone before we get started that we have a dedicated Q&A time for our audience members to ask our panelists follow-up questions. And so audience members, you're more than welcome to write your questions in the chat box so that way you don't forget. However, please know that we will not be answering those questions until the Q&A portion of our event. Okay. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the wonderful people that you see on your screen here today. First, I want to introduce my colleague, Sandra De Leon, who is one of the counselors for SJSU's Career Center. She partnered with me and has been amazing in helping me create and organize this event. Second, I want to introduce myself. My name is Randy Rodriguez. I am one of the counselors for the Accessible Education Center, or better known as the AEC. Third, I want to introduce Corey, who is one of our ASL interpreters. She is going to be also joined by Ray, who's our other ASL interpreter. And last but not least, I want to introduce our two wonderful panelists. First, we have Preston Berger. Preston is currently a recruiter and candidate success specialist with over 9 years of experience working in disability education, employment, and advocacy. Preston received his bachelor's of arts in psychology at Princeton University and master's of education with students with disabilities at Long Island University. Some of Preston's pastimes and hobbies include dancing and choreography, writer and storyteller, yoga, and collecting vinyl records. A fun fact about Preston is he is an espresso enthusiast and volunteered for 1 year as a barista for the NYC-based LGBTQ advocacy nonprofit Housing Works. So thank you, Preston, for being here. It's a pleasure. Our second panelist is Shona Spain. Shona is an accessibility advocate with over 10 years of experience, received her bachelor's in technical theater, and some of Shona's hobbies include Dungeons and Dragons, gaming in general, fountain pens, writing, training service dogs, and making everything in the world accessible. A fun fact about Shona is her favorite color is purple, and I quote, "I have the coolest wheelchair ever." So thank you, Shona, for being here. Now, both of our panelists bring with them experience in both the recruiter employer side and the employee side. And thus today I will be asking a series of questions in both the employee and employer perspective. Now, many of you in our audience are current SJSU students who are on the autism spectrum or know someone on the autism spectrum. And I've probably asked yourself some of the following questions. What is my next step after I graduate? What jobs should I apply for? How do I begin the process of job searching? What does a resume look like? Or what does a good resume look like? How do I build my interview skills? What are employers looking for? And most importantly, how does my autism play a factor in all of this? And what can I do about it? Now, these are all very important questions, and we hope that the information that we present here today is going to provide some guidance and some insight in order to help you as you continue your career as an SJSU student and future employee. So why don't we go ahead and begin with our questions for our panelists. So first series of questions are going to be more from the recruitment or employer side. I will ask Shona to go first. Okay. So Shona, what advice do you have for future applicants on how to make their resume stand out?
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I just realized that it might not be clear, but I am autistic, just for the record. I've done a lot of hiring and I've done a lot of interviewing. So when I'm looking at resumes, I look for the resume to be personalized. If you send me a general resume, I can tell. If you actually take the job description and pull out key phrases and find in your resume what would sort of match that, you can kind of bold it. Don't bold everything. And if the wording in the job description is close enough, is what you want to express, you can borrow that wording, and that'll be a good indicator that you've gone through the whole job description and you're not just applying for everything. And the other thing that I see on a regular basis is folks forget to put their contact information. Do not forget that. And if you have recently applied for something and have not been reached back out to, that might be why. Check your resume.
Thank you for those answers. I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulty because I think Preston isn't with us right now. Let me see if I can get him back.
Yes, he got kicked out or logged out. So trying to communicate with him to get him logged back in.
Sorry, audience, give us 1 second. Obviously, he's a really important individual that we need right now. So give us 1 second. See. Oh.
So I just resent them, just quick update, just resent him the link to log in because he wasn't able to log in. It was asking for a student ID. So hopefully he's able to log in shortly.
Okay.
Maybe we can move on to Shona for the next question and then come back to this question for Preston.
Yeah. All right. So next question is, what advice do you have for future applicants on how to make the resume stand out?
Is that what I just answered?
Sorry, that's the next one. What advice do you have for future applicants on how to strengthen their interview skills?
All right. So I went back and forth with myself about how I would answer this, because in the past, the way I've answered is giving you tips on how to mask your condition better so that you look more normal. Since then, I have gone through a burnout period and I've lost the ability to mask. So what I want to tell you is I'm going to give you some tips, and they will feel like I'm telling you to act more neurotypical, and I kind of am. However, the caveat is masking is unhealthy. So you need to make sure that you find a place where you could unmask. And the reason I'm giving you these tips is because I've been in this world for a while, and until I change it to be more neurodivergent friendly, this is kind of what's going to get you in the door. So I recommend that folk memorize stories that can apply to several different questions, because a lot of times employers will get all clever and use a regular interviewing question and kind of tweak it. And when you memorize those stories, you can memorize the cadence and the tone, and stories come across better in interviews. They have to be true stories. Okay. They have to have actually happened to you. I also recommend that you ask questions either during the interview or at the end, because while they're interviewing you, you're kind of interviewing them back. You want to use this opportunity to see if you want to work for them. Another thing I see a lot is folks don't know the answer to a question and they'll say, I don't know. And that's the end of it. Don't end there. If you don't know the answer to the question, that is completely fine. You cannot know everything in the world. So instead say, I don't know, but here's how I would get that information. Talk about how you do a Google search. Talk about the resources you think you could find that in, and just sort of expand in that direction. And I can talk forever, so I'm gonna stop now.
I think you bring up a really good point in having the applicant ask questions to the employer. You are also vetting them out, right? And you want to make sure that this is a good space and a good employer that's going to fit your needs and your desires as an employee. And from my experience, I believe usually employers kind of leave at the end of an interview an opportunity for the employee to ask, or the interview.
They do, yeah. And it's funny when I get a candidate that's like, I have no questions. It's a little strange. Like, because I'm like, don't you want to know what the day-to-day is like? Did I explain this too well? That can't be possible. Like, come, share with me. And you can find both lists of regular interview, like common interview questions, and you can find lists of like good questions to ask them at the end of the interview just by doing a quick Google search.
Correct. All right. Next question. Given your experience, what accommodations have companies provided for individuals on the spectrum, or how do you work with employers to accommodate the functional needs of candidates and or employees on the autism spectrum?
So I was actually diagnosed as an adult. So I've got experience in the world trying to succeed, not knowing I was disabled. This was before I was a wheelchair user as well. And after I knew that my brain worked very differently. What I've learned in the last 10 years is that there's this saying that people use, if you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. Good job. They're all different. And I think that that's really true, because when I approach this with autistics that I work with, it's a very individualized experience. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to find out where they are not succeeding and where there should be some support that could help them succeed. And again, in my experience, you kind of need to go in asking for the accommodation, because if you go in and you say, I'm struggling with this, I'd like an accommodation, either they will make suggestions that aren't the best fit for you, or they won't have suggestions, and that can just be really frustrating. So if you think about what would be the best way to support you to be successful, and you can go in there, even if they have suggestions, you'll already be thinking about this and you'll be able to respond a little bit better because you're prepared. I also tell people you don't have to disclose. And this is another thing I kind of went back and forth on. I wish we lived in a world where you could walk in and be like, I'm autistic, and have them be like, great, here's my first question. And it not really make a difference. But unfortunately, there is a lot of stigmatism out there. So I will always recommend that you frame your accommodations as requests to I keep saying this, to be more successful, to be your most successful self. You only want to go into the accommodation stage when they're not going to help you with those things. That's kind of how I sort of structure that.
And you bring up a good point in that there is unfortunately still some stigma behind autism and just disabilities in general, correct?
Yeah.
And even just the word disability itself. And a lot of people just don't understand what that really means or what it entails. And I think framing it in a different way where you're not disclosing, but you're still helping yourself to get what you need in order to be, as you said, successful.
Yeah. So one of the ways I look at this is autism is very, to get a diagnosis for autism, it's very deficit based. So it's very focused on what you can't do. When you go in to talk about an accommodation, often that conversation is deficit based. You're going in and being like, I can't do this, I need help. That's not a very strong position to start from, work from, end from. It's just not a good position. So if you can instead look at what you are really good at and what you know will help you be really good at that. And if that's missing from your job, you can go in and ask for that thing. That's going to be a much stronger position. I think there's a question later about like where I could give an example, but I can give an example now if you want.
Sure, please.
So A really common one that I find is autistics do a lot better if you give them an agenda ahead of time. So they know what the meeting's about, they know what to prepare for, they have a better idea of what you might ask them. That doesn't mean if you ask them something off the agenda that they'll disappear or something like that, but it gives them the opportunity to be prepared. I go into a lot of meetings or I've been in meetings in the past where people have brought up a topic and everybody in the room's like, yeah, I don't know, I'll have to look into that. And then they have to have another meeting. So I tell you that because when you say I'd really like an agenda, and you don't have to mention that you're autistic, just like it helps me be a little more structured and more prepared, you're actually going to help all the other brains in the room, because it's not just helpful for a neurodivergent, it's helpful for all of the others as well. And while that's a specific one I bring up with a lot of ADHD folks or autistic folks, I haven't met a neurotypical person that says, I hate agendas. They don't like making them, but they love it when they're there.
I think that's a great point. It's a great strategy. I know I love agendas. Like you said, it just helps you prepare and really present like the best version of yourself. So thank you for sharing that. What advice would you give candidates on how to find companies that value and want to hire individuals on the spectrum?
The first thing I will recommend is you look and see if they've got any public autistics. If there are any autistics that you can find that work for them, that are open about it, that's a pretty strong indicator. The other thing you can do is you can ask them in the interview. You can ask them questions like, do you expect your employees to sort of intuitively understand their work tasks, or do you set up your team in a way where you like to set expectations so everyone's on the same page? And to translate that, it's into like straightforward speak. Do you want me to guess and read your mind, or you got to tell me what you want? Because if you're not going to tell me what you want, this isn't going to work out. Because I don't know about you, but I haven't learned how to read minds yet. I'm working on it. Reading a book.
Superpower. Let us know when you're able to figure that out. But yes,
I like to say someday I will know everything. I will be able to read minds and I'll fix everything.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So then moving on to our questions from the employee perspective. Again, hopefully we get Preston back. And if we do, then we'll
I hope we do. He's got some really good ideas.
I hope so too. We're working on that in the background, but yeah. Thank you for bearing with us, everybody. So first question, what challenges do you encounter when searching for employment, and how did you overcome those challenges?
What frustrates me when I'm looking at job descriptions is that they're full of corporate speak, and they say things like, we want somebody who's got really strong communication skills. And I'm sitting there going, what does that mean? Do you want me to write good emails? Do you want me to be able to answer a question on the spot? Do you want me to text well? Like, is this a job where I have to do presentations? Is this a job where I just have to be polite to other humans? Like, what are we talking about when it comes to communication skills? And often job descriptions are just copied from other ones. And so like vague skill sets like that will show up on all of them. So that's always frustrated me a little bit. And one of the ways that I found to kind of get around that is if you can find anybody related to the company in any way that can help you decode that a little bit, that can be helpful. I know I've seen some videos on here are some common corporate phrases and here's what they really mean. So those could be good things to look up. The other thing you can do is ask. So if you get into the interview phase, you in one of your interviews or in those interviews, you can say, hey, I saw this on the job description, and I would really like to know what your feelings are on communication skills. Because that's an easy thing you can share back. I really think this is a very strong communication style, right? Like, I think it's really important to be as straightforward as possible, not make anybody guess what you're thinking. And nobody's going to be like, that's dumb, make everybody guess. They're going to be like, yeah, that's how I feel, and they'll give you an answer as well, because, well, that's just an easy one. That's an easy one for you to lob out there.
No, and I think it's good to be aware of what your challenges are. Like, ask yourself, what is it that I maybe need to work on? It's okay to ask questions when you're there in the interview. It can be a little intimidating. It can be a little scary, but it's for you, right? And it's for you, again, to present the best version of yourself, to support yourself.
Yeah.
Next question, what unique skills do you think you bring to your role and or company?
The first time I was offered a management position, I looked at the guy and was like, you know, I'm autistic, right? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, what makes you think this is a good idea? And he goes, well, the thing is, you think you're bad at people because you say that a lot. I'm like, yes. And he's like, but you know you're bad at people. So you try to find ways to be better
Hmm.
talking to humans. A lot of people don't do that. And I was like, okay. And then went like 100% in that direction. So I learned as much, and I'm still learning, but it's a special interest of mine. I boil it down to like different kinds of behavior and what's like the most efficient and what's the most effective and what's the healthiest and things like that. But when it comes down to it, if I'm working with individuals, I have a very strong background in being able to handle different neurotypes. And when I say handle different neurotypes, what that means is if somebody brings me a problem, I don't give them a cookie cutter answer. I will try to get to the bottom of what that problem is with them. And then I will use their brain to help me craft a solution to that. And that is a very difficult skill set to come by. You cannot do it intuitively. And it really does build better teams. And I'm very good at it.
I think that's amazing that the interviewer took what you thought is a challenge, and maybe it is, but saw it as a strength because you try to work in that area. And so again, going back to the
Yeah.
awareness of what challenges are, you can work to better them and strengthen them.
Yeah. I plagued him for the next like 5 years because I was an autistic manager and I'd be like, that's a dumb way to do that. Let's do that. And so he had to like be like, you can't say things are dumb. But I learned.
Sounds like you guys have a really good relationship.
He's a good guy.
Next question, did you request accommodations at your workplace? And if so, how did you go about completing that process?
So I have requested accommodations and some of them are really straightforward, right? Like I'm a wheelchair user, so the doors have to be openable by a wheelchair user. And when it comes to something like that, they don't really make you file an accommodation because you're sitting there in a wheelchair and they're not going to be like, I don't know, I need a piece of paper. When you're autistic or you're neurodivergent, you don't have a visible presentation typically of your disabilities. We call them invisible disabilities. And those are the ones that tend to need a lot of paper. So that's one of the reasons I recommend that you take what you need and try to wrap it in their corporate speak and make it something that you know will help you succeed better and see if they'll do it. Just go to your manager and be like, what do you think about putting agendas at the beginning of all the meetings? Because I think that would help me. And I think it'll help this person over here. And we'll just be able to be more prepared because she asks us questions and we have to be like, I don't know, let me get back to you. Wouldn't it be nice if you could give us an agenda and you ask us that question and we're able to answer it right away? You're asking for structure. You're asking for, you're asking for expectations to be set. It's incredibly helpful for autistics to plan out their days and their weeks and their months and their projects if they know those things. And if folks write them down, they have to think about how they're recording it, which means they're a little more thoughtful about how they're communicating it to other people, which means it's a little easier for everyone to remember. And it's a piece of paper that you can all be like, oh, yes, we did agree on that. You can make changes, but it's written down that way. So you can start there instead of being like, what did we agree on? 3 months later.
Yeah, no, it's great that you write it down. So it's there for records. And I think it's just so important to advocate for yourself, right? I mean, it's a skill that many of us do have to learn and have to strengthen. But in the end, it just makes things so much easier and better for the individual.
It can be very frustrating. And if you're sitting there being like, I don't know what to ask, you are not the first autistic to think that. And I asked the same questions when I got started with this. There are resources online. There are autistics that write about this. And I really think if you do a little bit of looking, you can find it. I'm sure Randy can help you with this, although I'm kind of throwing Randy out there. I'm hoping you can help him with this. Yeah. And you'll find a Twitter handle at the end of this for me that you can reach out to me and I might be able to point you to resources as well.
And I definitely know the audience appreciates that. I appreciate that as well. And it's okay to throw me out there. That's what I'm here for. Next question, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give students to better prepare for their job or internship search?
Honestly, when I said earlier that earlier when I mentioned masking, if you don't know what that is, I'm going to recommend that be your first step. Go look up social masking for autistics. And you really need to understand that about yourself, and you need to internalize that about yourself where you might be masking. One of the ways I explain this to just other humans is I say, you know how when you go home, you're an adult, you go home and your parents treat you the way they've always treated you. So you act a little differently at home. There are things you don't bring up. There are phrases you don't use in your everyday life. Like everybody's a little bit different at home. You could say the same thing if you're going to a wedding, right? You act a little bit differently at a wedding than you would act in your everyday life. I've got 1,000 of these. The point is, with autistics, it isn't about going home. It isn't about going to a wedding. It isn't about those little moments. It's about breathing and being alive. We have to mask every second of our day if we're around other people. And when I say that's really dangerous, the reason I say that is because you're denying your own self. You're denying like your personality and what is good for you. And you're taking in what society has told you, which is the way you think is bad. I disagree. Stimming is bad. I super disagree. Being really straightforward is rude. I disagree with that, but there are caveats. So what I'm telling you is learn what your masks are and learn how to take them off. If you can learn what your masks are and how to take them off, you can improve your masks, because if you take them off, you can recharge and you can be yourself. And if you can recognize the difference, you'll have more energy and more clarity on how to improve that mask. So you can walk into that interview and as Randy said, like be that best version of yourself that they want to see. You can walk out and go down the street to the trampoline store and jump around on the trampolines and get that energy out, right? Because you just masked for several hours. Whatever works for you, you really need to find that difference. And I didn't find it until I was a lot older than y'all are. So I want to encourage you to really start thinking about that if you aren't already.
I think that's a beautiful message that you're sending everybody, because there is so much pressure from society, culture, so many aspects, right? That individuals are supposed to act or behave a certain way. And so we do wear masks, and learning what your masks are and when you can take it off, when you can't, to strengthen yourself. I think that is a really, really powerful and beautiful message. And for a lot of the audience members to kind of do some research on themselves and become aware of what their masks are.
I do want to mention too that there is a version of this that's autistic masking. Some folks call it code switching. I know that belongs to certain communities, and I will express that that's from a different community. But I wanted to bring it up because I've seen people go, oh, okay, I know what you mean. There are other communities that have to mask. The queer community right now is under a lot of attack. And so those folks really need to try to act more normal, right? And so they're masking. So the reason I point this out is because you're not alone, not only in your community as an autistic, there are so many other communities where there's an overlap here, and you might be able to learn something from those other communities as well.
And that's a really good point, because as an individual, you might have overlaps in your own masking, right? Maybe you have autism, maybe it's the way you identify as gender or your sexuality. So now you have these multiple masks that you're having to wear and dealing with the pressures of it. So that's a really, really good point. All right. I don't want to say it's time for Q&A because we don't have Preston back, but I think we might have lost them for now, and I really hate saying that. But I think we need to move on just to at least the Q&A portion. Let me go ahead and take a look at some of the questions, and hopefully, Shona, you can. Yes.
Sorry, everyone, I'm having some issues with my audio here, but hopefully you can all hear me. So there were 2 questions that came in. The first question was, what accommodations are available during the interview phase and during the actual job phase? What is reasonable to ask for?
One of the most reasonable things I encourage people to do as a hiring manager is I reach out to them and I'm like, is there anything you want to know ahead of time? What you can do as an interviewer, as a candidate, when you're reaching out, is say, thank you so much for this time so that I'm better prepared. Can you give me an idea of what we'll be going over? This will also give you a better idea of how friendly this company is going to be to your neurotype. It's not like a, one-to-one, but it will give you an idea. What they should do is reach back out and be like, okay, we're going to be covering these kinds of topics. If you get really lucky, they'll send you the list of questions. And when I encourage other hiring managers to do this, I explain to them that you are not giving neurodivergents an advantage by giving them this information ahead of time. What you're doing is you're evening the playing fields, because a lot of neurotypicals can show up, be asked the vaguest question in the world, magically know what that person means, and give the right answer. Neurodivergents have a tougher time doing this. So if we're giving all of the candidates the information ahead of time, then you're evening the playing field. It's not going to make the neurotypical any better, right? It's going to make your neurodivergent have a better chance of reflecting their skill set in what is kind of a ridiculous way of getting a job.
Thank you, Shona. We have a few more questions here. Let me go ahead and pull that up. So the next question is, how do you handle culture fit interviews? I can get past the technical interviews, but my mask slips during the culture interview. They always go with the other candidate. How honest should I be with my weaknesses or needs if it makes me look undesirable?
Well, that's a really interesting way to phrase that question. I was first going to say, yeah, I bring up gaming in all of my interviews, and if they don't have any interest in gaming, I never get the job. But I think what you're asking is,
kind of seems like two questions.
It does. So culture fit is, sometimes I've heard that is like not a good team fit. Whenever I hear something like that, I challenge, like, what does that mean? Were they too loud? Did they move around too much? Did they not answer the question the way you wanted to, but it was technically right? And when I'm doing this, I encourage people to be really open-minded about how somebody approaches a problem, and that to try really hard to recognize if they approach it differently, that's a good thing. You both arrive at the same answer, but they get to it a completely different way. Hire them because you want that diversity of thought. You're going to get better products. You're going to get better out of that. I don't recommend you bring up weaknesses. What I encourage you to turn that around. If they're like, what's your biggest weakness? I want you to use the word opportunity instead. And you can mirror it right back at them. You can be like, well, I think the opportunity I'm focusing the most on right now is, and the reason you do that is language is very important and it's really unconscious. So if you go, yeah, I'm weak in this area, you are reinforcing what they call a confirmation bias. If you turn that around and say, I think one of my biggest opportunities is this, that gives a different flavor to it. Weakness is bad. Opportunity is you're working towards doing better. So weakness is, yeah, this sucks for me. And opportunity is, yeah, I've been working on this. And it'll have a better outcome. And I'm not asking you to lie, right? You can take a weakness and talk about it as an opportunity, one-to-one. I am bad at people. That's a weakness. I've taken the opportunity to learn more about how people behave and more about how they want to get work done. And I spend a little bit more time. I know I need to spend a little bit more time assessing that in my environment. It's the same thing. You're going into a little bit more detail. I'm using more corporate speak, and I used opportunity instead of weakness.
That's an amazing way of changing, the wording and the framework of that, right? The mindset.
I'm a writer. I think very strong. I've done a little bit of research into language, and like the way we can unconsciously influence a room is astounding.
I have a few more questions here, Shona. Let me go ahead and pull those up. So the next question is, how can you appropriately redirect people's misconceptions about autism or neurodivergency without coming across as defensive or rude?
I have a very special mask that I call, I know, right? So it's so how do I explain this? So when somebody comes up to me and is like, you're autistic, but you're so much smarter than that. I know, right? That's a weird thing that people keep seeing in like TV and media. It's really not accurate. There's plenty of people like me, and it doesn't really have anything to do with intelligence. So you kind of invite them into the ridiculousn's of it. If you phrase it like, that's stupid, that just comes from media, I hate it. You're taking it into a space that puts them on the defensive. When you use the phrase, I know, right, with the right tone, you're immediately going to invite them into what you're talking about. So they shouldn't be defensive. I say that there's always one, but it'll turn it into a conversation about your reasons for not thinking it's that way and your lived experience, that you're asking them to join you on when you say, I know, right? Like that's a question to them. And then you fill in the context of the question, they should respond. Theoretically.
It's a great strategy.
Thank you. The follow-up question is, how do
Actually, sorry,
oh,
can
go
I
ahead.
just add one thing?
Yes.
When I first got started on this journey and somebody asked me what being autistic was like, I would get defensive. What I had to learn is that I know more than the person asking the question. And yes, it is not my job to educate people about autism, although right now it kind of is. But you're walking down the street and somebody sees your shirt and says, oh, you're autistic, tell me more about that. It can feel sort of combative. What I have to remember is that I know more than they do in that instance. And so a friend of mine described this as a ladder of inference. So they are inferring something that's lower down in the ladder than you are. So I have a service dog. And before I was in a wheelchair, people would ask me if I was blind all the time because guide dogs are the commonest service dogs. This one time a woman asked me if I was blind and I said, no, ma'am, can I help you with something? And she was like, oh, are you autistic? And I was like, sorry. And she's like, well, if you're not blind, you must be autistic. That must be an autistic service dog. And it was amazing. It's the only time I've ever run into somebody whose second answer was, oh, you must be. So she had that information that there were autistic service dogs. You could see her jump from one thing to the other. So if you can kind of hold on to the idea that you know more and that this might be a good opportunity for you to share some of that, it might help with the defensiveness you might be feeling.
So we have actually, Preston was able to finally log in. We were having some technical difficulties. Not sure if, do we want to kind of go back to some of the questions here and then go back to the student Q&A?
Sure. Sandra, I don't see him, at least here. In,
Let me go ahead and make him a panelist or host here.
okay. Shona, thank you so much for taking all that on and
yeah, I wrote down all of my answers so I wouldn't info dump, and then when Preston didn't show up I was like, oh no, I'm gonna info dump so badly.
That was perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Shona.
Preston, welcome back. We on our end for the technical difficulties.
I'm glad I could finally make it and participate. Shona, whatever it was that you did, my hat goes off to you. Thank you for holding down the fort.
I'm glad you're here.
I think this is a good opportunity for the audience to see how to be flexible and kind of roll with the punches, right? Sometimes things just happen that are out of our control.
Yeah, but Preston either has a lot of experience with this or a really good mask on right now. I just want to reach through the screen and give you a hug.
So Preston, we're going to kind of go back in time a little bit and we're going to ask you some of the questions that we asked Shona. Shona was lovely and answered all of them already, but if you're okay with just kind of answering a few of them, that would be amazing, please.
I'd love to.
Okay, so let's go back, starting kind of with the recruitment employer side. What advice do you have for future applicants on how to make their resume stand out?
First and foremost, I just want to disclaim, if I'm repeating anything that Shona already said, please let me know. The last thing I want to do is tell you things that you've already heard.
I tried really hard to not give any of your answers from
Okay.
when we rehearsed
Well,
this. So
Here, here's what I've learned, particularly being on the recruiting end, is that never, ever, ever, ever downplay any of your skills. If you have sent emails using Microsoft Outlook, that is a skill that you can market as a tech skill. So whatever experience you have with, say, the Microsoft Office suite, or if any of you know the Adobe products, or even the Google suite, or if we want to get a little more into the creative end, if any of you are, say, video game designers and so have experience with a platform like Blender, or if you have a GitHub where you do open source programming,
that's a big one.
all of it. All of
Yeah,
it.
it's
going
all
on
really
your
important.
resume.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many, what's the word I'm looking for? How many positions that I've recruited for over the last year where we're not 100% sure if it's the right candidate, but we'll look at the job requirements and then we'll see in terms of the skill set. For example, they have a GitHub. Let's get them in and give them an interview. Every last detail counts. And that includes also on, I know I've been stressing more of the office technology, that includes with the creative technology as well. So
It
even
does.
say if you know, if you're say a production on the film and audio end of things and you know a platform like Odyssey or GarageBand, you can highlight that too.
If you understand color, put that on your resume. You would be surprised how often that gets somebody going, oh God, yes, you, get over here.
So any skill is a valuable skill is what I hear.
Agreed.
Yes. Including, I would say, writing. If any of you are writers out there and you've published or you're good with PowerPoint and know how to really spruce things up into a presentation, hype that up as well.
And I think this is a valuable thing that you're saying, especially for the individuals that are beginning their journey in job searching, right? Because they may not have as much experience or skills that they can put on the resume. So anything that they can highlight is definitely very valuable.
Amen.
Next question. What advice do you have for future applicants on how to strengthen their interview skills?
Other than practice, it's interesting. There's a lot of layers to this one. One thing I want to point out, moving forward, particularly in the virtual realm, the job market is starting to veer a lot toward on-demand virtual interviewing platforms as a method of screening applicants. So I would say really do your homework on platforms like HireVue. That's a really big one. I can't think of the other ones off the top of my head. Integrate partners with HireVue, so that's just like seared in my brain. But do your homework into how the artificial intelligence on certain programs or interview software evaluates their candidates. In addition to that,
are you talking about like buzzwords or something like that?
Oh, no. I'm talking, well, yes, that's a good question.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about something different. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify.
Well, no, buzzwords are important because what we have found in our research with HireVue is that some of these platforms will evaluate you based on your choice of words.
Okay. Yeah.
That said, they also will evaluate you based on things that, if you're, say, an autistic candidate, are unfair, like eye contact or tone of voice or body language. That's why Integrate actually is partnering with HireVue right now to do research into how to change up the AI so that it won't screen out autistic candidates.
Did you know that if you look at somebody's nose, it looks like you're looking them in the eye?
So that's a great strategy.
I have heard that before.
I teach it to kids all the time and their parents get really pissed.
I'm sure they do. And you know what? I'm sure it works like a charm.
Oh, it super does. I highly recommend.
But look at the other person's nose, not at your own nose, because then it's going to look like you're a little cross-eyed, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of preparing for a live interview, I would say I don't know if you guys talked about the STAR method yet.
No.
Okay, STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. And if you follow that formula, what that will prepare you for is what's called behavioral interview questions, where what they want to know is not just how you're going to answer a question, but they want you to answer it in such a way that it will indicate how you've behaved in the past, how you go about problem solving, and your ability to predict how you might behave in the future in certain situations. STAR, I'm going to tell you right now, it's a great way to organize your thoughts into a cohesive story.
You've
One
just
final-
reminded me about a way to structure adventures in Dungeons and Dragons, and it reminded me that like if you can play Dungeons and Dragons, it's actually a decent way to like mimic a corporate environment, like management and employees.
I love that. Oh, Varun is asking, so it's situation, task, action, result. One final thing I want to say. I'm assuming many of you here have advocates in your corner, whether that's at San Jose State or good friends and family, people you trust. During your practice, do not be afraid to talk about some of the harder experiences you've had, some of the bad times. And I'll tell you why. Because in going through them, you will uncover a lot of positive qualities about yourself. How you persisted through certain things. What lessons you've learned. How you go about learning them. So anytime, I would encourage, as a corollary to that, anytime you do a practice interview or a regular interview, sit down and take notes afterward.
That's a good idea.
Really good point.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the challenges that we experience in life teach us a lot of things or strengthen the skills that we already have. So that's a really, really good point. All right. Given your experience, what accommodations have companies provided for individuals on the spectrum, or how do you work with employers to accommodate the functional needs of candidates and employees on the spectrum?
Okay. I'm just going to speak from the vantage point of what we do at Integrate Autism Employment Advisors. Did you give them a rundown of Integrate and what we do?
No.
Okay. So Integrate is, we operate very much like a third-party recruiter where we're targeting a niche population, particularly neurodiverse identifying individuals, and supporting businesses in creating in-house autism hiring programs in competitive roles, associate roles or any, high-level internship, and then recruiting the talent and placing them in these roles. So the support is very structured. Typically, our candidates have a certain degree of decorum and readiness to enter a competitive work environment. And even with all that, challenges will still come up. So the way we address it is, first and foremost, before a candidate even sets foot in the door for an interview, we have already trained staff, particularly managers, in some of the common challenges they might run into working with autistic individuals, particularly when it comes to communicating with them. And the way we build on that is, even once the candidate is hired, we'll continually meet with the managers throughout the onboarding process or the duration of the internship to problem solve and troubleshoot. I'll give you one most recent example. I have a candidate who is working for a Fortune 500 firm, and it was starting to seem like he might be getting into shaky ground. And so what I pressed them on was, at what point will we be past the point of no return? And it turned out Their answer essentially indicated he hadn't handed in his timesheets. It had already been 3 weeks. If he could just start handing in his timesheets on time, they could forgive the rest. So I got on the phone with this candidate. I spoke with him. He was meandering a lot because, he was feeling a little backed into a corner, maybe a little ashamed. And all I just kept saying with a monotone voice, so have you handed in your timesheets? No? Why not? You didn't set up your Oracle account? Weren't you supposed to do that your first week? Okay, do you need me to stay on the phone to help you set up your Oracle account? It's not working? Okay. Email your email your human resources and have them set it up. By the following week, they said this candidate's done a total 180. So in my case, very often as a candidate success specialist, it's about identifying sort of where they're slipping through the cracks. In this person's case, it had nothing to do with their performance. It was just they weren't handing in their timesheets. There was another candidate I'm thinking of who in the manager's own words, this candidate wasn't a person of very many words. And so when we would give them advice to the effect of give them direct feedback and then ask them to repeat it back to you, well, as a literal thinker, this person would repeat back what they heard. And they still weren't seeing the results they wanted. This person kept making the same mistake. And so in that moment with the managers, I drew from my days as a caseworker and a higher ed counselor. And I suggested, why don't you try doing something called motivational interviewing? All you've got to do is just say, we're noticing you keep making this mistake and we want to know why. And pause after that and just let them talk. It will probably be awkward at first, but you've got to let them relate what's going through their mind and identify what's at the heart of why this keeps happening. And the following week, they came back and said the behavior has stopped. It turned out they were making that mistake because they were getting lost in the details. And so now we have a better frame of reference for how to teach them to slow down and be attentive to certain details. Does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. We appreciate the two examples that you provided as well.
I think if I could summarize it as simply as possible, a lot of what I'm finding is that the issues that pop up between autistic candidates and managers working with them is a communication barrier. And us as the, autism nonprofit coaching them, teaching both the candidates and the managers maybe how to find middle ground in the way they communicate.
Yeah, serving as the bridge.
Yeah.
Awesome. Because of time, Preston, I hate to cut you short. I want to maybe address one or two questions from the audience, because I think that's really important to have the audience kind of be heard. So why don't we go ahead and grab a question from the audience. I think the next one was from Kaylee. When applying for jobs, it asks for you to sign a document where you state any disabilities you have. When we get the job, do we ever tell them the truth about our disability? And if we eventually do tell them, how do we go about that?
I'm unfamiliar with this practice.
Are you talking about the section 508 disclaimer where it says, do you identify as a person with a disability? And it says, yes, no, I choose not to answer. That was for the panelists.
Yeah, let's see if Kaylee answers that. In the meantime, I want to ask you guys one more question. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Let's see. What would you say are important things to do for students who are about to graduate and have no work experience? I have found it difficult figuring out if what I should be aiming for, volunteering, internship, actual work, etc.
Just because you don't have work experience doesn't mean you don't have experience. You've been alive on this earth for how many years? Go through everything you do, including all of your hobbies and the things you want to get better at, and see which ones you can leverage towards a job that you'd like to do. if you go at it that way, you might actually find a job that you enjoy more than just applying to anything on the internet.
I would say networking is going to be really important in your case. Really learn how to leverage LinkedIn. Follow companies that you're interested in, keep up to date with any news about them, and also try to schedule as many informational interviews as you
Yes.
can with professionals. These are essentially low stakes conversations where you can meet with somebody in the industry and ask them about the field and how they got into it and what knowledge you should be up to snuff on. I would say definitely take advantage of the San Jose State staff at your disposal who could probably help connect you to some of those professionals, particularly within your alumni community.
Yeah, networking is very important. That's a good point.
Yes, very important. All right. I think unfortunately that's all the time we have. But for those of you who didn't get your questions answered, I have here on the screen contact information for both Preston and Shona, which thank you so much to both of you for providing this information and allowing our audience members to reach out to you if they have any follow-up questions or just want to chat and get some more insights, some more guidance, some more assistance on how they can kind of navigate their job search. Also, as Shona and Preston mentioned, for those students that are here at SJSU, you're more than welcome to visit and connect with SJSU's Career Center and the AEC if you have questions about career exploration, resume building, interview skill building, accommodations. Please feel free to come on in or visit our websites, email us directly, and we'll be here to provide you as much guidance as well as we can. And then, as I mentioned, we will be providing Zoom recording for this session. Please fill out the Google attendance sheet that was put on the chat box as soon as you can. And if you can do us a huge favor and give us your feedback about this event and this session. This is the first time that the AEC and Career Center has done something like this. We had a couple of technical issues and curveballs that it happens, right? But I think we were able to address it, and Preston was wonderful in handling that, as well as Shona. So thank you very much. But we want to continue to do events like this for the students so that way we can provide the information and the guidance necessary to help you be successful. And with that said, Shona and Preston, is there any last words that you want to give our audience members before we end this meeting?
Well, Preston, go ahead.
Well, other than, approach this with confidence and authenticity. I saw a question in the Q&A that I just want to address it, and it asked about what to do if you are blanking or freezing during an interview. Quick story, I walked into an interview one time. They already knew I had autism because I put it in my cover letter. I just walked in and I said, listen, as you guys know from my cover letter, I'm on the autism spectrum. What I found is that it takes me an extra second or two to come up with an answer right on the spot. So I was wondering, would you mind if I just take 30 seconds after you ask a question to jot down a few thoughts? And they gave each other a look and then said, sure. I got the job and was at that job for 5.5 years. So there's no harm in coming with a pad and paper and just jotting a couple of thoughts down.
And what I will tell you is you are a human that exists on this earth, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You live in a world that wasn't built for you. We are going to give you tips on how to navigate that. There's nothing wrong with you.
Thank you for those beautiful final words. I appreciate all the time that you both have dedicated to this event. Thank you, Sandra, also my colleague, for helping me host this event. And thank you to our 2 ASL interpreters. And with that said, our meeting is over and hopefully we can do this again. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Shona.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.